Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Chris Before Coffee. Today we're going to talk about something like what is tyranny and the truth of the tribe. I was inspired by this quote that I tweeted out the other day. Political tags such as royalist, communist, democrat, populist, fascist, liberal, conservative and so forth are never basic criteria. The human race divides politically into those who want people to be controlled and those who have no such desire. And this was the thing I was thinking about, this dichotomy of desire. I've always wondered where desires come from, but this particular quote that was brought up in the context of the Ferguson protests kind of made me wonder about this very fundamental desire indeed, the desire to control other people. And then I was somebody reached out to me in Skype, someone who I was friends with on the Feathercoin forum, and he was introducing me to the notion of the psychopath and just how prevalent psychopaths are. And he was like, why do we put these people in charge anyway? I'm like fed up with them. Turns out there was this study done where apparently 1 in 100 people in America are actually psychopaths, and these people are very, very good at making their way to the top of our institutions. I then found this tweet last night as I was kind of searching around, and I love this kind of stuff, and I used to do this all the time, and this is a woman who says that she was given a harassing email and decided to respond to her assailant by saying that as a woman in tech, I'm sure you understand that I get many, many letters meant to harass and intimidate me. I've come to judge them on several criteria. She then goes on to say that my suggestion to you really up your commitment as to being an arsehole. If you're going to be a pathetic dickhead that sits at his computer screen trying to scare and intimidate women, be the best dickhead you can be. Don't settle for mediocrity. I love this shit. I think we should actually have a slot on this show where people can send in their emails to their bosses and their psychopaths everywhere. I already did a call to arms earlier on Megan's show where I said that I used to have sort of undercover cameras if I used to meet someone in my old job that was like bullying anyone, me or anyone else, and I was kind of privy to it. The one thing they did not want you to do was to kind of shine a light on it, and this is why, right? So it turns out that the cops in Ferguson are claiming that they don't have any records of the arrests of journalists, which is really weird because a whole bunch of us on Twitter do, because we were busy favoriting all the pictures and all the documentation that was coming out at the time. And I guess I want to, let's introduce everyone to our show. So we have somebody new today. Andrei, say hi. You need to unmute yourself.
Hey, what's up?
Hey. And we have Jamie with us.
Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are, evening.
So let's talk about tyranny, because Andrei, you sent me something really amazing, just in time I might add, because I was going through a period of procrastination and ADHD, and you sent me this wonderful text called Listen, Little Man. And this talks about, well, you tell us what it says. It's basically a call to arms of the individual about how they can find the inspiration within themselves, that essentially the tyrant gets their power from the inaction of this little man.
Yeah, so I feel like the central problem that he's describing is that most revolutions essentially aim to drive society or civilization towards this better, freer, and more liberal state. And to do that, you have this hierarchical organization of individuals, and you have this charismatic leader at the top who drives the people below him who he wishes to free and liberate, and he depends on those below him to basically help him drive his agenda forward, and whether that's for the good of everyone or just for himself, it necessarily requires this top-down approach, as opposed to helping people find the drive within themselves to free themselves and subsequently free those around them, but not in the process of subjugating them, but having them free themselves.
So one of the interesting things that he brings up is this idea of outsourcing our power to the nation state, that we tend to fall back on our diplomats. And without, I mean, there's so much in here that I could quote because it's eminently quotable, but I think the part of the ones that I found is that he says, they promise you not individual but national freedom. They say nothing of self-respect but tell you to respect the state. They promise you not a personal greatness but a national greatness. And he talks about, like, why can't you relate to people all over the world? Why can't one carpenter relate to another carpenter anywhere in the world? Why can't one hairdresser understand another hairdresser in another country? Why do you always have to go via your diplomats? Jamie?
Remember the famous quote by John F. Kennedy, ask not what the country can do for you, but what you can do for the country? That's the same thing.
Yeah.
And everybody thought that was such a great, inspiring quote, but it was exactly what you just said.
But why the country? Why not, the individual? Why do we have to kind of strive towards this collectivist freedom? Why not?
Right, and that's what I'm saying is I thought it was a horrible thing for him to be saying. And of course, I wasn't around then, but when I hear people quoting that today and talking about what a great man JFK was, I think, no, he was a collectivist bastard like the rest of them.
Well, Wilhelm in the essay is going to say, you plead for happiness in life, but security means more to you. And I think that's got something to do with the tribe, which is what the title of today's show is, Truth and Tribes. Partly because later on we're also going to talk about what's been going on at Ripple, what's been going on at BitShares, wanting to kind of have an informal merge with Ethereum and so on. And one of the first things you notice when you go onto these cryptocurrency forums is this us and them mentality. They start giving each other names like Shiba or Ethereans or Bitcoiners, and you create this kind of in-group bias where if you don't know the shibboleth, if you don't know the lingo when you join up, you're an outsider. Because profit and money in general is a description of the asymmetry of wealth. You can't have a situation where everyone gets rich at the same time, because that's the same as saying no one is. So when you try to kind of conspire to make money, you've got to create a niche group of people. And I think it's got something to do with being near. Like, why do you go to university? You go to university to build a social network so that you can share the same halls as other people, so that when you leave university, you can always fall back on the alumni. You can always fall back on the people that you shared that time with. How about you, Joseph? Thanks for joining us, by the way. Oh, you need to unmute. One sec. Let me... Yeah, there you go.
Hi there.
Hello.
Yeah, it's good to see you.
What do you make of all of this?
Well, I mean, we've heard it before, and we'll probably hear it again, but it's absolutely true. I mean, individual empowerment is, everyone comes with that goal when they're born, right? You get it right out of the womb. And then later we're taught through socialized education, which is primarily state-funded, to be schooled, and rather than educated, we get schooled in how to be a person within a collectivist society. So, it starts very early and it progresses through the entire life, and it's not new, but it's something that everyone really has to kind of discover for themselves or rediscover. You get back to that childlike state, that really selfishness, which is something that is seen as a very bad thing, but that is really important to people. I mean, people do know themselves more than anyone else, and if you don't listen to what it is that you want, and you subjugate yourself and your own wants and your own needs completely to something else, then you lose that. You have to have a balance, and that balance is very difficult to find sometimes.
Because one of the things that Hitler did so well is he played on people's fears. That's how he got into power in the first place, is he exploited the economic strife at the time, and he told a story that really resonated with people. When he started going out to all the meetups in Berlin, I often wonder, like, what Hitler would make of the internet, right? Because he'd be a genius at getting clicks on YouTube, wouldn't he? He'd be a master SEO guru, right? A lot of this stuff that SEO guys come out with is right out of the Nazi propaganda playbook.
Well, I suppose one tool could be used for good or for wickedness. You know, a tool is like anything else. So sure, I mean, the internet is also, it's as much as it is for personal empowerment, it's also a fabulous surveillance tool. I mean, when everyone's phone can be turned on to watch where you're going and what you're doing, and all of your computers. I mean, right now we're on Google Hangouts, so you know the NSA is here watching us and everybody else, and you know it's recorded for posterity. So as much as it is for personal empowerment, it's also a two-way window, a mirror that goes both directions. You can be seen, and you can also be seen. You can have your message put out, but you're also watched. So two-edged sword.
And how much of this is about looking at behaviours? I notice a lot of people, like when you go out in London or in England, the parlance is the first question, what do you do? Like, how much are you worth? What's your economic status? Where do you live? I want to get a sense of what kind of house you've got. And these questions are all geared to matter. What do you have? What possessions do you have? Do you think we should start moving into a society where we start looking at each other's behaviours rather than their possessions? Like, how do you act? Anyone?
Yeah, very much so, and not just how you act, but also what you think. What are your ideas? What do you contribute? What do you make? What do you do is the question that people ask, and what they're asking isn't really what do you do, because you know what you do is, well, you're a father, you're a brother, you're a friend, you're all these things, but they want to know, you know, how do I put myself? Are you the authority over me, or am I over you? And they're trying to, you know, it's this ranking thing, which is very antisocial, really. I mean, you really want to know, how can I relate with you? How do I interact with you? You know, what are you to me? And that's really the question that's being asked when you ask, what do you do? The answer is, you know, couched in egoism. Well, I am, you know, the managing director of such and such, and it doesn't answer the question, really. I mean, you know, depends on where you meet in the context, I imagine.
Well, yeah.
Why do you think? Go ahead.
Somebody posted a thing on Twitter the other day that said, "Oh, a celebrity just sat down next to me. What should I do?"
Be a celebrity. Everyone is.
It's also about what you want to do as well. I'm not too interested in what someone did in their past, right? Unless it's relevant to what they want to do in the future. It's also about giving people the chance to reinvent themselves every now and again.
And I responded to that person saying, well, I just treat them like anybody else. If somebody sits down next to me, I just say, hey, how's it going? And see how they respond and go from there. I mean, I don't care what their social status is. You know, I've met people that are celebrities before, and I didn't know they were a celebrity. Those famous people that nobody knows that are famous, you know, it's an oxymoron.
Before I do the call to arms, though, I just want to pull up this point, which is where he says, don't try to outdo your exploiter in exploitation if you have the chance to become the boss. This is a pet hate of mine, because I used to see it all the time in my old job, is that the only thing worse than a dictator is the serf who wishes he was the dictator, right? It's the one that aspires to do all of the controlling, because, you know, if you can't beat them, join them, right?
Right, and leaders attract followers, and followers create leaders. It's a problem that everyone is responsible for.
But do you think there's a distinction between a leader and a ruler? Because my impression of a leader is that they should make new leaders.
Well, that's a good distinction. I think that's apt and probably a better word to use. Right, a ruler would be someone who creates rules for others, and arbitrary rules, and a leader is someone who fosters the development of the people around them. So I think there's a good difference there, and thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah, and also not only do they create the rules, but they create rules that they know that they can manipulate. And that's what I think, we're going to get to this in a minute, because you flagged up a really good article on Forbes that I wanted to talk about the fact that these regulators want the monopoly on evidence handling. They want the evidence inside of their four walls so that they can tell the story about how the crime was committed. But what we're looking at now, particularly with the blockchain, is where the evidence is on the outside. This is a database that everyone now has a copy of, that everyone's a stakeholder in, and anyone can go off and investigate that crime. But I think what I want to ask people, before we go into that, I wanted to ask people if they thought it was a good idea. I've got a Bitmessage set up. I can put the address down in the description after the show. But I would like to get your stories on your, megalomaniac bosses. If you know a tyrant, no matter how small, even if they're one of those impotent tyrants that's just the line manager, I want to hear from you. I want to get copies of these emails. I want to get copies of videos. I want to get copies of undercover audio files, because I think we need to shine a light on it. It was the same thing with MT Gox, right? You had somebody who fostered a culture of fear within the company, whereby nobody stood up to this guy because they were too scared. And that's what bosses will do a lot of the time. They will say, well, you could have said something, but no, you can't, because they create this kind of like anxiety in people where you don't feel like you want to stand up to them because you don't want to get shouted at.
Well, a lot of times it's a fear of losing your job, too. Mm-hmm. I had a boss in the early 90s who was the foreman, and he was just a mean son of a bitch, and he would come in the morning and he'd start throwing things around, and what the fuck is going on here? How come them bastards last night on the night shift didn't get this done? And he was just a lunatic, and I lost my temper one time and went off on him, and he went to the owner of the company and tattled on me for not falling into place. And the owner of the company called me in and told me that if I did that again, I was going to lose my job.
Right. Well, let's drill down now. Let's take this directly to Bitcoin, because I've heard countless stories like that, Jamie. And I want to point out, this is Joseph's Twitter, where he says that Bitcoin needs a central bank, just like an international space station needs a kickstand and training wheels. So tell us about this article, Joseph.
Oh my. Well, yes. So this there's the article right there. Eric Mu, he's a contributor from Asia, it appears. It looks from reading the article that he came to it with a idea of a proposal of putting out a central bank for Bitcoin and having a fractional reserve system, and that this would solve the problem of the exchange type issues of Mt. Gox, right? Well, the premise of it, set that aside for a moment, and I agree it's a mistaken premise. But if he had done some basic research into the distributed exchanges that have come out today, I mean, there's the counterparty DEX, there's Mastercoin has got one. There's already solutions for the problem of centralized exchanges already in play. And it would have been a great article and informative and something that would have really helped people to know about, because it's not very well known. This article could have been. He missed a great opportunity with this horrible article for bringing out something that needs some attention, rather than putting out a solution for something that really isn't a problem anymore, and not a non-solution for a non-problem.
Yeah, so he's totally missed the curve on this. And he also points out that OKCoin did a proof of reserve audit, which became all the rage after Gox happened, right? Because what Gox kind of showed was that, look, you've got all these really, really smart people that are keeping their money on the exchange. I proffer because they don't want to be the last ones out the door, right? You want to be early, not late, when that market crashes. And I think because you've got these 40-minute confirmations on the Bitcoin network, people are of the mind to keep their coins on these exchanges. And so then everyone rushed. We had CoinFloor in the UK to try and do these proof of reserves. But as I've been trying to tell people, that only shows that they haven't cheated you yet. And it only shows that they haven't cheated you in regards to their Bitcoin holdings, not their fiat, because you can't do proof of reserves there. So this guy has just massively, massively missed the point. And what a shame in such a big magazine, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point that you made with the proof of reserves, because Mt. Gox had even done one of those too, right? They moved coins to show that they were in control of them, right? So this proof of reserve trick isn't a solution at all, right? So yeah, I mean, this is not a good article, and I think a big problem in not just journalism but all of Bitcoin. There's just way too much to do and not enough people that understand things that can do them. So what you do, I think, is fabulous. Getting out really good information, on point, on a regular basis, and informing the people. This is something that I think more people should be doing. Not that you need the competition, but
no, I don't see it as competition though. I see it as the more the merrier. I think I want to encourage people to do their own video channels and to shine a light on this stuff. Like, there are some people in our space that are really good communicators, okay, and it is incumbent on them to get a channel, get a Twitter account, and start raising awareness. Because right now there's way too much PR, there's way too much propaganda. Now, the other day, something interesting happened. We had a little bit of a scare. It's fine now, but a bit of a scare that people couldn't take their money out of Bitstamp, because everyone now is like on eggshells. Everyone is waiting for the next GOX. Which is it going to be? Because these exchanges are the worst thing about this industry, because they're centralized. So a couple of people posted up simultaneously that they were having problems withdrawing from GOX. One of them was I think they were both businesses, but one of them was a business whose bank refused to accept money from any Bitcoin-related transactions. So it wasn't Bitstamp's fault. They just couldn't send the money to that bank. And what happened was everyone jumped on that thread. The thread rose up to the top of our Bitcoin. It got lots and lots of views on Bitcoin Talk. But one of the commenters on the thread said, nobody flagged this as solved. Right? You created all this worry and this anxiety in people, and I still feel like we've got a lot of work to do within the industry to police ourselves, because I've always said that our regulation lies in the code and the community. It lies in the people getting together, breaking open these databases and saying, this is what happened to me, this is what happened to me, and here's where it all led.
I think it's interesting that there's a rush to set up like an arbiter who's in charge of things, and it's interesting that an arbiter and arbitrate share etymology with arbitrary, so that's another.
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I'm a real stickler for etymology as well, but it's also about control. Like, what I don't understand about these police and these regulators is they're not really members of the police. They're not members of the public, in the sense they're quite privileged. Often, they all went to the same university. They all kind of hang out with their friends at the banks. So they're all in it together. They're all just chummy pals. And they're not really there to regulate anything.
The key is that whoever it is, it's not me, and I can be a passive observer to this phenomenon, and I can kind of kick back and let someone else take care of this business for me, because I'm too lazy and I don't have drive, and
gumption. The word gumption came up in Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, right? That you got to have some drive. What was it? Who were the two motorcycle companions that he had at the beginning of the novel? John and Sue? I can't remember now. It's been a long time. But they didn't want to look after their motorbikes. They didn't want to service it, because they'll take it to the mechanic when it breaks. And the whole thing, he's like, why don't they take some responsibility? Why don't they realize that this is their duty to learn how to maintain their own motorcycle, and not to allow themselves to become dependent on someone else's expertise? And that's the risk we've got now. Something as important as our wealth, we freely outsource to people, because the problem is a lot of people look at their bank balances. Well, for a start, they call them balances. It's not a balance, it's a liability. You don't know that money's there. In fact, that money probably isn't. And if everyone went to check at the same time, it would be like a Schrodinger equation, and it would just vanish out of thin air, because it isn't really there. The people don't realize that when you ask someone to send money to your bank, what you're really saying is, I'd rather be in debt to my bank than be in debt to you. I'd rather be in debt to one central location than be in debt to lots of different people, because then I'd have to remember who I went into debt to, or who owes me money. And the great thing about the blockchain is it's full asset reserve. Every last unit of account is accounted for. You might not know where it is, and you might lose your private keys, but the blockchain does.
Yeah, and that's a really good point that you brought up, and you mentioned it earlier about how exposed the blockchain is. That everyone can look at it. It's entirely decentralized. It's fully inspectable. It's hashed to a level that any forensic engineer would be able to use it in any legal case anywhere in the world. It irrefutably is what it is, and everyone can see it totally out in the open. If all the banks had to do this, there would be no issue with money laundering because everyone would see where all the money went.
So why do people label someone like Amir Tarki as being militant? That's a word that I've often heard about him. And I know that he can be very strongly worded, but he's one of the smartest people in this whole industry. A lot of what he says is absolutely bang on, and yet he's seen as the extremist.
You know, it's interesting because a lot of what the cryptocurrency issues are reducing the burden of government. They're reducing the responsibility of government. They're taking some of the tasks that we have outsourced to government and bringing them back into the community of people who could just do it, and using math and using software to get it done without any expense that's shared amongst everybody. So it's seen as militancy because it reduces the authority of government, and reduces it not by taking it away, but by obsoleting it. And so I think militancy is kind of, it may be a strong word, but there's no military involved. I mean, it's all honest, open, and voluntary.
That's the irony, is that we don't go to war on the internet. We might have our troll fests, and we might slag each other off with lolcats and GIFs, but those don't hurt people the way F-16s do. And what struck me about this whole, these talks that are going on in Minsk at the moment, we had a conversation about this last night on Twitter as well. No one commented on the great interior marble and all the expensive luxuriating that was going on in Independence Palace, which is where these talks are being held, which is in Belarus, which is a very poor country. But you can bet your bottom dollar it wasn't the leaders that paid for this wonderful marble interior, right? These warmongers fucking make me sick. I don't go to war with people. When was the last time you waged war on anyone, Joseph?
Oh,
right? We don't wage war on people, but these people love to just sit back in their big marble buildings and talk about peace. And yet, how many people have died already in the Ukraine? And it's all over gas. It's just over money. And they make it out like it's over some kind of national pride issue or how it's some kind of religious issue so that you don't go near the topic because, I don't want to offend anyone. Like, yeah, but you're only doing that so that we don't have to have this hard conversation. The fact is, it's the third largest shale gas reserves under eastern Ukraine, and that's what this is really about. Why don't you just call a spade a spade?
Well, there's people that have jobs that are called spin doctors. That's entirely what they do, is rewrite the headlines of reality. And they twist the words around to make the leaders or the rulers look good and make it what it actually isn't. It's just bizarre. I go through the headlines and translate them to what they really mean sometimes, and it's just absurd.
Yeah, it really is. Let me just pull up another thing that I saw on our Bitcoin as well. We see, like, Reddit has now become the front line of journalism. I swear, it's so good. I keep wanting to remind everyone about what's happening to Ross Ulbricht, because I sort of feel like most of the people in this industry just kind of want to let go and say, oh, well, that was just kind of the dark past of Bitcoin. We've kind of grown out of that now. And one of the things that's not being reported in this case is the malfeasance of the prosecution and their sly tactics of increasingly coming up with more and more things for the charge sheet so that they can prejudice the jury. Because what will happen in this case, I think the prosecutors are hoping, is that they will just see all of these charges and just assume that Ross is guilty straight off the bat. I mean, otherwise, why would there be so many charges on the charge sheet?
Yeah, I tweeted a link out too earlier this morning of a video interview with Ross's mother. Jeff Berwick interviewed Ross's mother on Sunday. There was a good interview.
That's a key problem with the collectivist mindset that forces people to view this as, or what Amir Taki says as, a militant speech, because they identify more with the government than they do themselves, and they fail to realize that the government really doesn't hold their interests at heart, and their identification with this higher order is just feeding this entity to have more freedom and more control over, their well-being.
I think it really embarrassed the US government as well. I went onto the CoinDesk article a few days ago to comment on one of the people that were talking about these extra charges, and I said, look, the US government were embarrassed by the Silk Road with a $26 billion running cost on the war on drugs so far. Along comes a hacker who overnight shows how you can drastically reduce the violence and negative externalities in the drug trade with a peer-to-peer currency and a reputation system. Never compete with the government or show them up by doing their job better than they can. And these people just want to cling on to their jobs. You see it sometimes, if you start a job for the first time and you've adopted some of the duties of a co-worker who's been there longer than you. You know how you kind of get that tribalism that comes up, like, you're on my patch now. Don't be too good at your job or otherwise the company might fire me. And what does it come from? Does it come from this kind of like this need to kind of relax and assume that our work is done? Like, I don't want to have to keep learning my job. I don't want to have to keep getting better and improving how well I perform. I'd rather just sit back and just take the money and then not have to think about it.
Yeah.
Now this idea of competing with the government, I think, is it should be seen not as something that's militant or wicked, but as something that's magnanimous, and even go so far as to say it's in the national interest, because you're reducing the cost that's taken by people with force by taxation. Nobody really wants to pay taxes, but it's taken from you. It's exacted from you in taxation. And if you can reduce that cost, then you've done a public good for your community. And there's shipping services that have replaced the post office in many countries that have taken on much of the burden that the government really couldn't do profitably. So that, I think, is something that is in not just the national interest, but in our individual interests. Both, and in this case, okay, so the drug war is a very expensive thing. We spend a lot of tax money fighting this drug war and trying to keep, the criminals or whatever from fighting each other and from killing each other and from using the money they make to overthrow governments or whatever they do with it. So there's a lot of money that's in blood and weapons that are thrown into this. And if all of that weren't necessary, say, for example, drugs didn't do bad things to people, and the people that made money with it didn't hurt people, if all of that just went away, would there be a need for this drug war? Well, maybe there are other reasons for a drug war. Maybe it's a good excuse to do other sorts of invasive activities that a government might want to do. It's a reason to send troops into a country, for example. They need to fix a problem. So there might be some other places where this drug war, part of the drug war, the reason for its existence, has been taken over by the war on terrorism or the war on whatever else it's going to be next. So it gives this this causa belli to enter into a conflict that that there might be some other reason for, like, for example, shale deposits in Europe. If there was some other reason, well, the people want their freedom, or the people, they're drug lords in there, and we need to go invade, or they're terrorists there, and we need to, get them. If there's some other reason, they can hide the reason that they might really have, which is to do a resource and land grab, and to create a new authority and a tax base or whatever it is that they're attempting to do as far as the power brokering that goes on. So yeah, no, if you can take away any of the onus of what government has to do, then you've done a public good, and full stop.
So what would be a real crime, surely, would be is if we replace the same system with a new monster, right? Just replace one monster with another. And I want to segue into this. This was brought to my attention by I Am Lizard Queen on Twitter, where he said, I just woke up to Ripple coin supply from 8 billion to 28 billion. This has increased the market cap by $100 million. It's a disgrace. That then leads to quite a few people getting involved, including Bryce Wiener and Andreas Antonopoulos, who basically agree that it's a centralized fiat coupon. This is the jump that we saw in the market cap. And of course, that instantly led to the main theme of this show, which is us and them, this kind of tribe. I don't care what the truth is, I only care about the tribe. And this was the kind of response that we got. We win. Apparently, the only metric for success in this industry is coinmarketcap.com. That's about as nuanced and sophisticated as we get around here. It reduces to one league table, how much money can you supply? This is bullshit.
Oh yeah, I mean it's a dilution. It's the opposite of market cap. You know, and it's the same thing that happens with centralized banking. Okay, so what happens when new money is created? Where does that money go? Well, it goes first to the federal government employees. It goes to the immediate coffers. It goes to the banks. They get it before it's been inflated. Well, in this case, the same thing happens with the ripples. Okay, so the Ripple company has more ripples. They get it before it's inflated. So once they start using it, then that's when the devaluation and the inflation happens, and it all becomes worth less. So the market cap is very temporary. And you know, okay, so they got a day, they get some news, you know, they have their moment in the sun. It's probably the last flash in their pan. If this is what they have to do to keep going, it's really sad for them.
And what was quite sly about it, I noticed, was that it wasn't New Ripple. This was a technical semantic term that was used. And actually, the top Redditor points it out really well at Sucrim, where he says, in essence, what's happened is that Ripple have basically released into the control of the market some Ripple that already existed, and that coinmarketcap.com wasn't allowing for those. So what I want to know is, who the hell has the right to type some numbers into a spreadsheet and call them valuable, and why the hell do we assume they have value in the first place? Andrei, I wanted to, Andrei, you just smiled. I felt like you had something you were going to say.
I mean, this ties back again to the need for an arbiter. I mean, people like arbitrary things because it feels magical. And like someone says it, and it is so because it was said. And this the topic of tribes reminds me of a book called Saharasia, which basically the premise is that this problem with society doesn't stem from the birth of an individual or the birth of a nation, but it originates thousands of years prior, where civilization was being born in the first place, where we originally came from the rainforests of Africa. And at some point, deforestation and desertification kind of ruined that paradise, and some people say that this is where the premise of the fall, as it's referred to as, comes from. Mm-hmm. And we basically went into the savannas and the deserts and morphed from this anarchic, peace-loving community oriented society into a tribal, paternalistic, top-down, scarcity-based civilization where we depended on warring and imperial exploration, conquest, raping, and pillaging to survive. And this was all happening in the Sahara and Asian region. And basically this mindset was exported into like wherever these people went. So all the other anarchic, peace-loving tribes, and they weren't tribes, but they didn't stand a chance to these desert people who, scarcity was all they knew, and the chief, the arbiter, that's where he came from, and it's basically come up until today, where we have this in more sophisticated and nuanced forms.
Well, I wish I knew we were going to go here. I'm loving where you're taking this, because I've been reading Hesiod again recently, because I was really interested in Mesopotamia, Iraq, modern-day Iraq. I'm really interested in looking at modern-day events and looking at what that land used to inhabit, who used to be here, who used to maintain this. And of course, it was the Sumerians, and our original culture, our oldest texts come from the Sumer, and in particular the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is thought to be the oldest, which addresses the question of why do I die? What does it mean to be alive? Which really defines us, right? Adam and Eve and the Garden of Eden and eternal life and paradise on earth. This is still a question I think that we are struggling with, particularly with companies like Google now that have an explicit transhumanist agenda. They think that mortality should be optional, that you should be able to upload your brain into the cloud, and then you should be able to return into a different body and all these kinds of things. So this is something that really hasn't gone away. And I tell you what, I wish I'd been more prepared, but as you were talking, I just pulled up one of my favorite quotes from Hesiod. Let's see if I can pull this up. So this is from Works and Days, and before I go into this, the chronological map of Hesiod and Homer is unknown. Homer, who is more famous for the Odyssey and the Iliad, introduced ancient Greece with a thinker and a warrior, right? But it's often thought that Hesiod came second, and I want to bring up this point that in Theogony, which tells the story of how people came into existence, of how the gods became men, or how the men became gods, it wasn't through some divine sense of justice that Zeus won. Zeus won because he had the gift of thunder and lightning, because of Prometheus bringing fire to man. So we shouldn't be fooled into thinking that in this current transition that we're going through with Bitcoin and so on, that somehow we're going to win because we've got justice on our side, or that somehow, you know, we're just right and they're wrong. I think a lot of this is going to come down to just brute force. But this is a really good quote that I think is quite apt from Works and Days. So Zeus will destroy this race of mortals when children are born grey at the temples. Children will not resemble their fathers, and there will be no affection between guest and host, and no love between friends or brothers as in the past. Sons and daughters will be quick to offend their aging parents and rebuke them and speak to them with rudeness and cruelty, not knowing about divine retribution. They will not even repay their parents for their keep, these lawbreakers, and they will sack one another's city. The man who keeps his oath, or is just and good, will not be favoured, but the evildoers and scoundrels will be honoured, for might will make right and shame will vanish. How apt is that? How accurate is that to describe today? Jamie?
Yeah, I think that's the way we've been, our society has been for thousands of years, and it's been, oh, we'll just get a gang together and force everybody to do what we want. And I don't think that's the best way to achieve freedom. I think the same way those gods are irrelevant today is people just quit believing in them and quit worshiping them. I think that's the best way to go about dissolving governments, is to just make them irrelevant, and through things like Bitcoin, ignore their fucking regulations, ignore all that bullshit that they think that they want to do. It's difficult in the beginning because if you're alone, but like Derek J and them out in New Hampshire, and there's the Free State Project in Wyoming, and there's getting to be more of these societies that are like thinkers, and they're just setting up these communities that are basically a group of like-minded people that are telling these governments that, hey, we're not going to put up with this bullshit anymore, and we have enough people here that agree with this that you really can't come in and enforce it without
Jamie,
making it look like a massacre.
Before we even get to that stage, don't we even need to diagnose a problem in the first place? I think for many people, for us, yes, this is all self-evident, but for many people out there, they don't even think this is a problem in the first place. All they hear is something, something Israel, something, something Ukraine, something, 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 because to them it's so big and amorphous that they don't feel like they can do anything. They're almost subdued into, you know, just kind of being copacetic and sucking on their, you know, cookie fried dough or whatever it is, and their frappa lattes and whatever, into just doing nothing.
Oh, yeah, and I think by putting out shows like we do and talking about these issues and telling people that, you know, anarchy is not violence, and I've quit. You know, I was talking about this yesterday, too, to Anna, and saying, you know, I think I like the word voluntarist because it's not as shocking to people. You know, it pretty much means the same thing as anarchist. But when people hear, oh, you're a voluntarist, what's that? That sounds good. You know, you just believe in voluntary interactions, and you believe in the non-aggression principle. And
anarchy literally means without rulers.
Right.
And archon being a ruler without.
Right, but the way governments and the media have played it out over the years, people hear anarchy and they think of people breaking windows and starting throwing Molotov cocktails and all of that. So
yeah, they confuse it with chaos. And just to bring us back on to the central theme of this segment, which was ancient Greece, that I think what ancient Greek got right was it told a story at the beginning that everyone could resonate with, particularly between the earth and the sky. Now we know, because of relatively new science called archaeology and anthropology, we now have the full picture. We can see further back into time, and we can see the history that Greece itself didn't even know about. Now, I'm using the word Greece here. I should point out that the word Greek is a made-up word. It has no etymological root. It was made up by the Romans because the Romans wanted to take credit for what the Greeks did and thought in their folly and hubris that they could get away with it because they didn't anticipate modern civilization like ours with the internet and so on, with people comparing notes and saying, look, this is what I discovered and this is what I discovered. And so a lot of the stuff that's even in the Bible actually comes from Mesopotamia, which is about, I think it's about 4,000 years ago or so. And a lot of the stories that we see come up in the Bible, and a lot of the stories we see right here in Hesiod, I don't know how we can call ourselves poor when all this information is out there. How can you be poor when you've got this degree? I mean, you can actually go into the Greek here, okay, on this website, which is Tufts University, perseus.tufts.edu. You can Google it quite easily. And like all great Greek poetry, it starts with a song. And it starts because song, you know, the music is a wonderful way of conveying information. You know, the saying, music is a big prayer, that it can resonate throughout time. That I don't understand why we can't go back to these early caveman philosophers and ask the question, where did this all go wrong? Can we go back to the beginning, go back to the kernel, the source code, and work out where we took the wrong step?
Well, I don't even think that that's going to help. I mean, it might help for people in their individual discovery of, you know, finding freedom, but I think it's more each individual has to figure it out for themselves, but to even just plant the seed that, hey, you know, if me and my buddies get together, the last thing we do is think about voting on who's going to be in charge of the hunting party or the group. You know, that's something that just doesn't happen. So why, when we have a larger group, do people think that we need to vote or, you know, have somebody that's in charge?
If people had read their history books, they'd know where voting came from. It came from Cleisthenes. It was a response to the mob because he needed to take back charge of Athens, but he couldn't because, you know, the Spartans had come in and the people of Athens didn't want another aristocrat. Right? And so he had to come up with some measured response. So he checks the history books, he sees this thing called democracy, and he thinks, well, I can use this. If I give everyone a vote, then people won't rise up against me. And it was basically a mechanism. But, you know, Andrei, who loves his etymologies as much as I do, demos, kratos, it just means people power. It's got very little to do with the tokenization of voting.
Yeah, you know, back to your point about finding out where we went wrong. I mean, I think there is some usefulness there in looking back. I mean, you go back to the caveman, you see, okay, where was the misstep? Where was the place where we diverged from a place where we had more freedom and more individual capability? And this comes back even today. I mean, you look at that article that you brought up earlier that we commented on, which is, you know, where did his thinking go wrong? You know, well, I think the assumption that a centralized authority is the answer to the problem was the place where he went wrong, because once he did that, the rest of his entire article was, you know, mammering on about nonsense, nothing that was useful. And the same thing happens, I think, in the early caveman days. Okay, well, I don't know what to do, you don't know what to do, none of us really know what to do, we have to find somebody who knows what to do, who can tell us what to do. And that subjugates them to that idea that this is going to happen over and over again, and we need these people to bring them up and make decisions for us so that we don't make them and they do it right, and then we can. Well, really, what's the leader's job then is really the one who kind of takes the blame for making those decisions, and they're not going to make them all right, and they're not going to make them all wrong, but they have a place to focus on. Once they make enough wrong decisions, they get rid of them, they get somebody else, they stick 30 knives in them or something else, what they do. But they shift the power, and that takes away their own individual responsibility for being wrong. They may have been wrong in their heart, or they may have been wrong in their mind, or they may have decided wrong, or they may have agreed with the wrong decision, but they're not responsible for it because they're not the one in charge.
Yeah, but responsibility isn't a choice. Like, nobody chooses to be born. Everyone has to be born somewhere. That's not an idiosyncratic fact. It's just true. And the way you respond to that is in itself your responsibility, your ability to respond. And also, you don't have any control over your reputation. Your reputation exists so long as two people agree on some piece of information about you. And I think now the internet is making us incredibly responsible because we have the big picture, because we have all this evidence around us. It gives us something to respond to, and I think that's why a lot of people flee to Facebook and they go to all the clickbait and they go to Farmville and all these games because they don't want to hear what's going on.
I think it was really interesting that you pointed out that the Greek poem started off with a song because music is the progenitor of language, and language is one of the reasons why I'm so interested in etymology is because language is a technology, and one of the things it's very effective at doing is controlling, and that's one of the main uses of language primarily is to control the discussion and the mental states of people.
It's about controlling the frame, isn't it?
And that's why democracy is so powerful, because the question is already framed. Like, you're not voting on questions you're making up yourself necessarily. The vote is on a very narrowly defined discussion, and to think that democracy is freedom it's only as free as the things you're voting on. And I was wondering if I could read a section of an article I sent you a while back.
Please do.
It's from Charisma and Authority. And this is the preface. It says that authorization is the perpetual challenge faced by the self. How do we know what to do? We might say that our self makes the decision, but why does it do so? The ancients attributed their actions to gods, personal and political. Modern secularized people reflexively attribute their actions to their rational, deciding self, informed by law and science. Law and science are ultimately authorized by the same transpersonal forces which authorized traditional societies. And it's interesting that charisma, which Heidegger might have referred to as care, is one of the, it is the source of authorization. And when you talk about Zeus and the fire and the thunderbolts, I see that as a metaphor for this charisma and this internal drive, where the individual isn't seeking external sources of authorization, but rather internal, care.
Wow, I mean, you brought up a lot of things. You brought up my favorite philosopher at the moment, which is Heidegger, of course. Have you got a link to that article, by the way, so I can put it in the comments?
Chris, you know more about Socrates and them than I do. Wasn't Socrates one that, there's like the Socratic method and things like that, which involves, framing the conversation so it steers in your direction.
Yes, that's true. The important thing to remember about language, and a lot of people don't do enough research into semantics, is the signified and the signifier. People don't realize that language is just a signal. It just passes on to something else, because in order for anything to make sense, right, in order for these words to make sense to me, there has to be contrast between the foreground and the background. So language is all about making matter describe other matter. A map is made of the same particles that it signifies. It points to a land somewhere else that's made of particles, but the map itself is made of particles. So language is a special type of way of manipulating matter that can point to and give direction to other matter and other existences somewhere else. Now, the Socratic method, Socrates thought of himself, although he doesn't leave any writings, he thought of himself as a gadfly in the marketplace. He went to the market because markets often give rise to this sense of, God-like invisible hand moving forces, and he wanted to wake people up. He wanted to ask them questions that made them think, and it wasn't about steering the conversation necessarily. If you read a lot of the Platonic readings of it, he just wants to be an antagonist. He just wants to jab them and force them to change their way of thinking. In fact, one of the things he's reported to have said is, look, don't ask me for an opinion, think for yourself. Stop following other people's opinions and start following knowledge. And knowledge, he felt, was a relationship with substance. That it wasn't something you could have, it wasn't something you could sell either. Because remember, Plato's, these gardens, these philosophical gardens, were outside of the city walls. They necessarily needed to be outside of the city walls because that was the only way that the city would grow, is if it embraced the things that changed around it and incorporated them into itself. So when we talk about framing, let me pull up a tangible example right now, which is Facebook. This is ironic, right? Facebook's new clickbait rule will totally blow you away. Now, I think they're trying to be funny with that headline. We already reported the other day on ChangeTip, who did a similar type of article, because now, of course, these SEO marketing guru bullshitters, they're coming under pressure because people are so good at recognizing authenticity that we're starting to notice that we're having our frame manipulated. If you turn up, if the first thing you do in the morning is turn up to your Facebook feed and start clicking on whatever looks good or interesting, then you bet you're going to be controlled with language. You bet that everything you do is going to be monitored and you're just going to be used, and you're going to find yourself buying things in the market that you didn't even intend to buy, but you're only buying it because, unbeknownst to you, someone did some market research up there in Ogilvy and Mather or whatever ad industry company they were in, and realized that if they put this color on this logo or use this particular strap line, that would up their sales by 25%. And then you just become a number to these people. So now Facebook, which is just the scourge of the earth right now, they're now saying, oh, we don't like clickbait anymore, so we're going to get rid of the clickbait. But hang on a minute, guys, what about your business model? So what they're really saying here, from what I can make out, is you can't post link bait unless we're getting paid for it, because that's what most sponsored content is. If you've paid for an ad or if you paid for an endorsement on the Facebook feed, what you're basically saying is, I don't want any spam unless I get a cut of that spam. Why would you pay for an ad that you're not going to get clicks on? Right? As a business, we're joined by Theo.
Hello.
Hello.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I think that they want to have a monopoly on the link bait. I mean, of course, that would be great. And I mean, all SEO and web marketers are always trying to figure out how they can get the most bang for the buck, and it's not necessarily bad per se, but I mean, you have to understand they're figuring out ways to go around Facebook's user agreements and Google's user agreements without being penalized, and Facebook is just catching up, and it's always a race. And then it's going to be the next step is going to be that the SEO guys and the social media manager or whatever the hells are going to figure out another way to try to figure out how to manipulate Facebook's rules to go to the next one. So now you can't do. They're saying they're going to define link bait, or what do you call it, clickbait, as XYZ, and then they're going to be, okay, well, how can we manipulate that in a way where we can do it that fits into the rules, or Facebook might be shooting themselves in the foot. There's a point. There's going to be a critical mass where nobody's going to want to use it for marketing anymore if they restrict it so much, because they want to have it right now, like what you were saying. I have to be honest, I haven't read the article, so I'm just talking off the top of my head. But they want to have, of course, they want to have a monopoly on that content, and a lot of the content is this so-called clickbait. And if they can monopolize that content, they can monetize it for themselves instead of letting other people monetize that content. I think that's what that whole game is about with Facebook and a lot of the other platforms.
Joseph, do you have any thoughts on this?
Well, sure. I mean, they're looking for attention, right? And how do you control attention? How do you grab attention? And what are the mechanisms? How do you boil that down? How do you dissect it into all the little component parts? And then how do you monetize that, right? That's the game. So, they're getting rid of it, so they don't want you to do it, and they want to do it just themselves. They want to own the monetization of the attention. Right? That's how they separate themselves from the rest of the internet.
So how do you wake people up from this? How do you get people off of that blue pill addiction?
I don't know that you can. Right. I mean, that's really the same question they're asking, isn't it? I mean, how do you get attention? How do you get attention back once people become lulled into sacrificing it constantly? How do you wake them up? Right. That's the same question they're asking. So the answer is probably in what they're doing too, or what I would say is, well, you surface it, you expose it. The truth will set them free, as it were. The more you can show the mechanism of how the tools work that are being to manipulate you, the easier it is for you to develop the defenses against them.
Yeah, I would invite everybody next time you're on Facebook to just go over there to the section where it said where you can create your own ad. Yeah, and then you can get a feeling for what kind of parameters they're collecting on you and on everybody. And it's really amazing. I mean, at Google is the same, but it's a different style. And Google is but Facebook is quite interesting because I can really narrow it down. I guess they're basing it mostly on likes and less on what searches you did. But I can probably target an ad for someone that likes small dogs and lives in southern England and eats Rice Krispie treats or something like that. And it will say, okay, there are 100 people that fit that criteria. It will cost you, so much per click, and you'll get approximately these amount of clicks. We don't recommend that ad because we're not going to make very much money. Why don't you instead target people that like mid-sized dogs and large dogs too? Then you'll get 10,000 clicks a day, and we'll make tons of money, and you'll get plenty of clicks. And and you can just get an idea. Also, I want to point out a game. It's called Data Dealer. You can go to datadealer.com, and it's really good. It's very well made. So basically, they've gamified data collection and data monetization, and it gives you an idea how it really works. And you can play the little game. It's still in beta, but it's gonna be better. But you can still play it, and you can get a really good. Let me do a screen share. You can get an idea of how what kind of data is really collected and how it's monetized by people. And it's really funny. They always add things to the game that are based on reality. So there's like a hacker or something like that, and it's always based on a true story. Okay, now it's loading, so you're gonna have to wait. I hope it doesn't take that long. But
dealer.com/play there. Okay.
I've mentioned before too, even Twitter. I'll be typing something about, oh, I saw this about something in data security, and 2 minutes later I'll get a ad pop up, in my feed about, oh, are you looking for your data security expert? Click here. And, it just pretty much mirrors exactly what you've typed in your messages, and I'm sure a lot of what Facebook does is the same sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, basically, it comes down to what we've been discussing is like how are we gonna, or how is anyone gonna do anything without advertising on the internet? Because basically, what it does is it makes advertising from the other point of view. If you use it, it makes advertising really efficient. Because now I can pinpoint. Before I had to use a billboard on the highway on the interstate, and I had no idea who would see this. I knew they would be driving a car, so they had to be at least of legal age to drive. And I knew what state they were from because they were on that highway. But that's about it. I didn't really. I knew that they drove by. That's it. I don't really know. It's pretty random. I call that shotgun marketing, where you just take a shotgun, you just shoot, and you hope something happens, and that can be effective. But with online marketing like this, now with all this data, I can really pinpoint exactly, and I can even track who's clicking. I mean, I might not know the name of the person, but I know, okay, 19-year-olds are clicking my ad, and so are 50-year-olds, and I can go back and I can do all of these stuff to to really improve my advertising, and that's what this data is being used for. Also, it's being used by governments, but perhaps even the marketing aspect is being even used more heavily, and probably it's all speculation that the governments are trailing behind the marketing experts. You know, they're saying, hey, look at all the information they're collecting. We need to do that too, and they're just copying a lot of what they're doing with their real powerful computers. What do you have on the screen there, Chris?
I was just looking through the comments, and one of the interesting things was people were actually comparing notes on how to drive numbers on using pictures and different avatars for like the irony, like, don't you understand that you're driving the demand for this shit by acting like this? If you treat your customers like a commodity, like a number on a spreadsheet where you just need that stick to go up and to the right, then of course people are going to feel depersonalized. But as we've noticed already, particularly with these religions, I mean cryptocurrencies, particularly with this kind of tribal mentality that comes along, is people do want to build friendship on the internet, right? They do want to kind of get together and have, like we are right now. This very video is evidence of the fact that a bunch of people self-select into a peer group and start interacting on the internet. We're not treating each other like numbers right now, are we?
Not at all.
Oh, but you're in charge.
I'm the tyrant. I'm tyrannizing you. But the great thing about this is that everyone gets to be in charge now. So I'm not stopping you from getting your own show, and then you can be in charge. It's really about division of time. The problem I have with kings, and I think Hesiod would agree, is it's not the king that I've got a problem with. It's the king that takes more than their fair share, that just devours, right, that just overstays their welcome and gives nothing back.
Right, and you aren't forcing any of us to be here or making us pay to be here. Forcing us to be here and making us pay to be here besides. That's essentially what a government would do.
Mm-hmm. So I'm doing a screen share of Data Dealer, and it's a really, I think it's a good part of it I want to show. So here, the chance to find, I can make a dating site, and I can collect data that way. And you can say, okay, right here I can choose, well, what data do I want to collect? Date of birth, sex, phone number, email, relationship status, sexual orientation, political attitudes, age at first sexual encounter, okay, and then I can choose one of those. And if I want to upgrade, I could get a nice logo, or I could make premium membership. I could even make a nice privacy policy that is really hard to read, so nobody pays attention to. And I can go, and then I can go over here to ads, and you can choose different ads. But what I think is really funny is the team. So you go over here to team, and you can, and I love their faces. So here you go here, programmer. That's only 500. Look at his eyes. He's really tired. Or you can get the programmer that's a little healthier. That costs a little more. You can hire a psychologist. That's pretty expensive. Or you can hire a manager. And depending on who you hire, you're going to get more data, basically. And so I think this game is really interesting and kind of realistic. How this is great. Personality test. We have that on Facebook. So they update, and they've added that. And you can collect. This is the data you can collect with the personality test. And yeah, it's similar. You can hire a team and try to make it more effective. You can do different ads, and you're going to collect different data depending on that. And in the end, you just fill your big database, and your database is worth a lot of money. And that's basically the whole game.
This is wonderful. Everyone should hear about this site. I think before you even sign up to a social networking website, you should be forced to do this. That's a bit of tyranny right there. Like, how about a noble lie, like a platonic noble lie, where we have to kind of tell you a story about how you've got to go through this game, and so that you can understand. This is why I find it difficult to go to London anymore. I haven't been to London for ages. I'm going to go up tomorrow to meet one of our audience members from Ghana, which I'll talk more about later. And I can't stand it. Like in these co-working spaces, as soon as you get a startup, everyone becomes your enemy because they're either a customer or a non-customer. And your exit strategy is to sell out to a bigger database so they can consolidate the personal identifiable information that you got on your customers into their database.
Yeah, I know what you mean, exactly. It's all about just you talked about it before, about just making that really big database, and then another big company comes and buys the startup. And the point is not to make your product or your company, but it's to make it attractive enough for a venture capitalist to buy it from you or to invest in you, rather than actually building something that's interesting or useful per se.
Right.
It's the
Okay.
new get rich quick type deal where, oh, I'm going to make, even with products like we see with Oculus or whatever, oh, I'm going to make this, and Facebook's going to buy it from me for $100 million or whatever it was. Or like this Twit or Tweak or whatever that video game site is, you know, oh
Twitch.
yeah, Amazon's going to buy that. Twitch. Yeah, Amazon's going to buy that now for $10 billion or something. It was just a ridiculous amount of money.
Didn't WhatsApp have an evaluation recently of about 10 billion? Was it Snapchat? Sorry, Snapchat.
Yeah, there's so many of them now. I mean, that's all it is. It's like a big pump and dump for companies.
And what's really, this will segue really nicely, because I want to steer things like a tyrant into a more technical domain. And this is going to be the Reddit post of the week, okay? You should all go and check this out. I think I put the link in the description below because YouTube lets you do that now. I'm just going to upvote this. And so this is from somebody called Throw Ahoy Matey on the subreddit, where he says that Bitcoin is a process, not an event. And he invites people to learn how novel, learn about the Lindy effect, Metcalfe law, and social psychology, learn about the regret aversion bias, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, and hype cycles, learn about marginal utility of Bitcoin versus other types of money. Notice the hypocrisy of people who simultaneously criticize Bitcoin because retailers don't hold on to it, and because too many are just hoarding it. And I just think he's just nails it in this post. He absolutely. So maybe one solution is that we should actually be going out and championing these people. In that article that we started the show off with, that Andrei introduces to, listen, little man, he actually calls this the kind of people this chap is referring to is little big men. So there are no end of little big men around you that are not your line manager, for example, who will gladly step over you to get to the top of the new pyramid. And they will exploit the fact, if you don't understand the rules better than they do, how they can carve out a little tyranny all of their own. So I'm talking about BTC-E, I'm talking about all these kind of pump and dump exchanges where they own the database. So actually, I think this was brought up on the Bitcoin developer thread, where they were trying to, one of the things they're discussing at the moment is encrypting the messages on the blockchain. And one developer chirps up and he says, well, actually, more cryptography isn't going to solve this, because at the end of the day, if someone wants to launder money, they can right now. They go to New York, they get a bit license, they set up a centralized exchange, they shake a few hands, they sleep with the right people, and then they trash the database. That's how you launder money. You don't do it with some like high-tech cryptographic thing, because there's always going to be holes in that floor, right? These companies like the NSA and GCHQ are really, really good at pattern matching and drawing graphs. And I think we can learn from people like this, where he's actually trying to make other people feel confident about their knowledge and actually giving them access to, you know, really good articles like this, which actually help people understand their own risk aversion and understand their own tolerance towards taking risk.
Well, if somebody's dishonest and wants to defraud people, I mean, there's always going to be a way around laws and a way to do dirty deals. And, you know, there's just, I mean, bankruptcy, for one thing, is legal in the United States. All you got to do is borrow a ton of money and then default on it. And, you know, everybody, my dad owned a gas station in the 70s, and back then he had people that had bought a bunch of stuff from him, like tires and stuff for their cars, and then they filed bankruptcy, and then he got stuck with, they never paid him for the oil changes they owed him for, and the tires that they bought from him and things like that. And, you know, these people, whether they legitimately needed a bankruptcy or they were just looking for a way to dump their debt.
This is the You bring up a great point. This is the developer that I was citing. It's a guy called Troy. It's on the developer mailing list, so the link should be below, and it's on sourceforge.net, where they're talking about encrypting Bitcoin messages. This is one of the proposals that have come up. And this is what I mean when I talk about the regulation is in the code and the community. This is where people like Nintendo Lawsky need to be going to have some kind of say, as if he deserves any say whatsoever, but I guess he's human too, right? He's a person like anyone else. Get to have a say over the way this coin is regulated. And he's actually bringing up, he says, look, if you want to commit money laundering, just get a bit license and a good securities lawyer. That's how you do it. You don't put in lots of, PGP asymmetric cryptography, because the powers that be, at the end of the day, they can still knock on your door. They've still got the monopoly on violence. So none of that's going to make any difference anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you want to defraud people, just go out and get every credit card and everything that you get mailed. I mean, I get stuff in the mail every other day. Oh, you've been pre-approved for a $100,000 loan, or, borrow up to $250,000 pre-approved. I get all this stuff, and I just shred it immediately. But if I was dishonest, I could take all those loans and just say, the hell with it, I ain't paying.
So one of the things I want to address, and maybe Andrei, you can talk about this a little bit, is the psychology of trading, and in particular people's lack of ability to be self-aware and conscious as they're doing it. The fact that people will always be able to manipulate you if you refuse to change and if you get stuck into certain habits. And one of the things is regret aversion. People don't take risks because they fear that they will regret the decision later on. And one of the things that I've noticed is that the people that are good at reading order books and people that are good at looking at market signals, particularly those with access to insider information, can just use that to rinse other people. It essentially becomes a way of just robbing people.
Yeah, I mean, before the show started, we were talking about the troll bucks and what effect that has on the markets, particularly in BTCE. And I've thought for a long time that that's definitely a calculated effort on the part of the exchange owners, because what it essentially does is, constrain the narrative to whatever is happening, right next to the chart. And even if you're not talking in the troll box, it's right next to what you're looking at, and it's kind of like a centralized box of groupthink that washes over whoever is using that site. And even if you're really good at reading the order books, and even if you have insider information, it's there, and it has some effect on psychology.
One of the things that Max Kaiser brought up in the Kaiser report really well the other day is he talked about how all the surveillance is pointing in the wrong direction. So you've got all this surveillance, in the person, in the individual's life, looking at what they're doing, and you've got all the militarized police in Ferguson. But where's all this surveillance and policing in Wall Street? Why are they not being surveilled? Do you think that really, that if I went in and I did a presentation to a bank, and I have done presentations at banks before to introduce them to this technology, and I sort of present myself as this kind of hacker, right? And I said to them, right, I've got a copy of all your emails, I've got a copy, I know what you've been doing, I know what you did last summer, right? I go in with this kind of speech. Do you not think that everyone would just run back to their desks and start deleting things? Of course they would, because they've all got something to hide. Because that's what happens when you leave people to their own discretion and you look the other way. So one of the things, I think, this is the troll box that we were talking about. And you people are very vulnerable in here, because a lot of people come into crypto for the first time, and it's all about how the experienced traders can manipulate the newbies. In fact, the word noob, spelled N00B quite often, is another shibboleth. It's another term that gets passed around in this community, where it's almost like an in-joke, where you're there to be manipulated, and it's almost like you've got a rite of passage that you've got to go through. before you get adopted into the community. So if you're willing to take the losses and you know how to ride these waves and come back and then manipulate the new wave of newbies that come in about 3 months in after you've learned all the tricks, then you're part of the clan now and you're part of the family. And in fact, there's a big hat tip to the guys that made this, trollboxarchive.com. And this, of course, is the infamous Fontus, who's now largely disappeared, but he was a massive pumper-dumper last year on the BTC Trollbox. He had a number of sock puppet accounts, just fake accounts that he would come in and he would just start pumping certain coins, and he had a Twitter account that everyone followed where he'd announced that he was going to make the price go up, and so everyone would try and rush in, clamoring over themselves to get on the top of the next pyramid that he would announce. And what I like about this is that Trollbox Archive gave you the ability to get accountability. You could go back through and you could look up someone's username, and you've got upvoting and downvoting just like you've got on Reddit, and you can look at the statistics on the usage of certain terms so that people could do their own research. But I still feel like people are too easily led into a future by these tyrants. It's like we want to be told what to do.
Yeah.
That's pretty sad.
The path of least resistance is pretty attractive. It seems to drive a lot of society today. So.
But these people get addicted to their losses, don't they? Because what happens is they just keep betting and they have to keep betting some more. And it's like a never-ending trap. It's like a honey trap, and they just get stuck in it. But the question that Max brought up is, well, why don't they surveil these areas? Why are they surveilling Ferguson and not surveilling Wall Street?
Yeah, but that trap isn't necessarily confined to finance and economics. Democracy, democracy is a trap too. You keep voting for people that end up turning on you, and what happens next? Next voting cycle, you go back to the polls and you listen to the talking heads, as they're called, on CNN, MSNBC, or Fox News, and they constrain the narrative, and you pump and dump politicians. It's a never-ending cycle.
Yeah, did you see the video that Julia Turansky did with, I believe it was the Danish Prime Minister or whatever, at Bilderberg, where she
I saw some of the Bilderberg videos. Yeah, they were really good.
And he was talking about, well, that's your responsibility because of democracy, and you have to vote for that. And then he turned right around and said, well, you can't do anything about that because, we already decided that. And she's like, well, what about democracy? And he's like, well, that's just the way it is.
In just the same way that there's insider information on the exchanges, there's insider information in politics. And you can never have, no regular person has enough information to make truly informed decisions when it comes to democracy, because that's just not how the system works. So unless you are on the inside, or you somehow spend every moment of your waking life researching what's happening, piecing together how everything is working is close to impossible, and you're going to end up holding a bag that you might not want to be holding.
That's a really good point. I think the regulators have that same problem. I mean, they don't really understand the issue, and they go out, where do they get their information? Well, they get their information primarily from the lobbyists who are being handed a bunch of money by some company to push their interests forward. So the regulators come into the game with the idea that, well, they've been given this job to make some kind of a rule because people think there should be a rule, but they don't know what kind of rule to make, and who's telling them what rule to make? Well, these guys that have been paid to write up the rule that's going to benefit their company or their interest. And then they go and they buy the access to the regulator, and they give them the pre-written document, and they say, here, pass this. So the path of least resistance then for the regulator is just to take the lobbyist document and say, okay, here's the regulation.
Yeah, so we've got that right now. Well, first of all, the whole troll box thing, I mean, it also comes down to people being responsible. I mean, come on. People have to, take everything with a grain of salt. And I'm not saying like we talked about before, it's a shame when people are new to crypto and they think, and they come and they actually believe the stuff that's in the troll box. That's bad. But I mean, you know, I just look at it as another indicator. I mean, the troll boxes say, you could say the troll box says sell, then you buy, or whatever. I mean, what's the sentiment there? But I wouldn't do it exactly buy sell like that. But I wouldn't take it for much other than what it says. It's called a troll box. Then take it as a troll box. You know, I mean, that's what it's called.
That's not its official name, though. That's something that people came to call it.
Yeah, but everybody knows it's called the troll box. And, you know, come on. You gotta, you know, use your brain a little bit and think about, you know, if someone is screaming it's going to crash, then they want the price to go down. It doesn't take a brain scientist to figure that out. And but about the whole lobbyist thing, that's definitely true. And that, you know, we've got this whole what do they call themselves? It's a really interesting name. The digital lobby group of digital commerce, or what the hell are they called now? They're not called Bitcoin Lobby Group. Damn it. You know, there's that.
I know what you mean.
What are they called again? Because their name is also kind of like as if they're not called the commerce, the Chamber of Digital Commerce, but they're the only one. So people call it the Chamber of Digital Commerce, as if they're the only one. And who made this chamber? Who is this?
Well, the Perry and Burings group.
What now?
That's it.
Exactly.
Perry
And
Ann,
who's behind that? Who gives them money? What the hell is that? I mean, you know, supposedly it's a member-driven organization, but I've asked, well, how do I become a member?
Oh, that's a classic. The member-driven organization.
Exactly. And I said, okay, well, how do I become a member? Do you accept everyone? Well, we go through a special selection process, and they have to meet a certain, you know, ethics or something. But I never got a transparent answer about. I asked on Twitter directly. I said, what ethical standards does one have to meet to be a member? But I couldn't get an answer. It's like, oh, we're not ready yet. We're so busy with BitLicense, and then it comes out that they weren't only busy with BitLicense. Now they've got one of these, what do you call it, a PAC or whatever, where you can, you know, get people to give money. I don't know. I'm really suspicious of this whole lobby thing, and I think people need to pay attention to what's going on, because what's happening is that people, the regulators are looking to them, and they're thinking that is the community, but that's not the community. You see what I mean? And that's a real dangerous aspect of what's going on, because and especially the name says it all. The commerce of digital commerce, or what? The Chamber of Digital Commerce. Nobody gave. I'm just going to make my own. I'm Chamber of Bitcoin now. Yeah, and I'm gonna. Okay, everyone, send me. There's my QR code. Please send me. I'm gonna lobby people. So give me some Bitcoin, because I'm now Chamber of Bitcoin. So that's great. I'm gonna lobby people.
We can just say we're the United States Regulatory Committee, and just incorporate that name.
The Committee of Regulating Regulators.
I think that's a really big problem in the crypto space in general, because it feels like there's a very large group of opportunists who have basically just seized on this moment where, you know, cryptocurrency is the Wild West of finance, and they can just position themselves as these figures of authority because there's no one there, and everyone's looking around for authorization, and they're there and they provide it. They're more than willing to do it.
And the politicians figured out that, hey, Bitcoin is something that you can transfer value with. We got to make a law that says we can accept this for political donations. So they had, where I live here, there was a politician that was accepting Bitcoin, and they made him give it back because it was illegal. And then they passed the law that said, oh, yeah, now you can accept Bitcoin as a political contribution. So they let him keep it before he gave it back, and now every politician in the United States can accept Bitcoin for political donations. So you can officially bribe a politician with Bitcoin.
It's also going back to what we just said about people positioning themselves as a middleman. you know, and that's kind of like what the lobby group is sort of doing. You know, they're trying to present themselves as the voice, but nobody who are that nobody asked me. I don't know where the hell that came from, you know.
Well, it's not a middleman, it's a man in the middle attack, isn't it? That's what a middleman really is. It's just someone who wants to siphon off funds. But a well-behaving parasite, as it's defined in economics, actually obscures their identity. So you shouldn't even know that the parasite's there if the parasite is doing its job well enough. It's only bad parasites. So going right back to the top of the show, where that lady published an email that she sent to one of her tyrannical bosses, where she was saying, look, if you're going to be a dick, at least be good at it. Don't be a mediocre arsehole, for fuck's sake. You know, if you're going to bully me, if you're going to like be this oppressive, you know, patriarchal character, I want to see you put more effort in.
And it comes back to the controlling the language and twisting the words to make it sound like, you know, they have this complicated name that makes it sound like they're officially the ones, but nobody really knows who the hell they are. And then, you know, well, it's a political donation or a political action committee. Well, they're a group of people bribing politicians is what they are. And to make the laws, and they're going to make the laws in their favor.
Yeah, so that's what troubled me, because now they have the PAC, which is just this kind of fund, and they're asking people to donate as if politicians need more money. I mean, what the, you know, what, sorry, that doesn't work for me. We don't need to be, you know, building up lobbyists. We need to be doing something totally different. And I think people need to really wake up and you know, people are talking about, well, regulation is inevitable, we need to do this, we need to do that, we need a good bit license. Well, I say there is no good bit license. I mean, I tried to get them someone from that chamber was speaking, and I said, well, they're talking about a good bit license. Well, what is a good bit license? But nobody could tell me what this good bit license looks like, you know, so that's not defined at all.
Well, I think they should start with a dollar license. You know, you should have to have a license to be able to accept dollars. Once they figured out that one, then they can worry about something more complicated like Bitcoin.
Dobby Barker had a great bit license, the intergalactic bit license. Just, you can have it.
Yeah, it was just do what you want. Here you go, have some freedom. I love that. Well, look, let's round up the show then with Developer Watch, or Development News Watch. This is a new segment I'm trying to introduce. If YouTube had more tools, there would be some sound effects, there would be some swooshy graphics. So just imagine that for a minute, and maybe we'll come back and edit this later. But one of the things I've been trying to do is focus people's attention on the Bitcoin developer mailing list on SourceForge.net. Anyone can see the conversations that go into the making of this powerful new technology. And one of the things that the Bitcoin developers are talking about at the moment is where the code should be. Where should people have to go to see all of the commits? And at the moment they're using GitHub, which uses a distributed technology called Git, which basically allows you to make changes on your computer to the code. You can then generate these things called hashes. Yes, this is going to be for a learned audience at the moment, so I don't have time to go through all of the history. But that hash uniquely describes all of the changes that you made. What something like GitHub does is it becomes a centralized social network where everyone pushes their code and everyone can see all the changes that were made throughout history. Now, one of the ideas that I came up with a little while back is, why don't people publish their Git hashes to the Bitcoin blockchain as a way of proving that they did that work at that time, so that should anyone come back later on and want to assign, you know, moral rights or copyright or anything like that, you can produce the hash, produce the Bitcoin block with the timestamp in it, and say, look, I published this at this time, this work was done. Well, maybe it's a coincidence, I don't know, but the Bitcoin developers have also got this conversation going on. They're asking, well, fundamentally they want to know, should we continue? This was originally by Jeff Garzik, who said, should we even be basing Bitcoin development on GitHub? Maybe we should put our money where our mouth is and have it be distributed, so use our own local one. The conversation then evolved over time, eventually with Vladimir, who said, look, the problem is GitHub has a low barrier to contribution. It means that we get access to more developers. So I think, like a good lead developer, he wants to be a pragmatist. He wants to go with the safest option. He says, I think someone mentioned later on in the thread that there are something like 4,000 forks of Bitcoin, which is obviously a lot of people contributing to it, and he is worried that we're going to see a drop-off. And actually, what I think a lot of that comes up in these conversations on the mailing list is how to make Bitcoin more accessible. Because remember that these guys are developers. They're not marketers. They're not community managers or any kind of engagement officers or whatever the hell we're supposed to call them these days. And I think we should be helping these guys out. I think we should be making this more appealing to regular people. I do have meetings coming up with people that have watched the show who want to meet me. I'm not a coder myself, although I understand it well enough that I can Google my way around some code. But one of the interesting things that comes up later on in the thread, I think it's Peter Todd, brings up this idea that we could actually, because the question is, if somebody wanted to hijack the Git repository, because GitHub is centralized, they could do that. And so I think what they're talking about is actually publishing the keys, either using a tool called Mercurial, which is like Git, but it's more immutable. Let me just see if I can find that thread. Yeah, there we go. So this is Peter Todd, who talks about, he says, Git serves two purposes: recording public history of communication, and it also basically gives you a total history of every change that has been made to this code, so that later on, because one of the things that frauds do really well and hackers do really well is they lie about the sequence of events whilst you were looking the other way. That's how they manipulate the story. That's how they get you to make that deposit into your bank account. And I think there's an opportunity for us to help these guys out, because it looks like, I don't know if that's struggling, I don't know if that's misrepresenting it, but they seem to be having a tough time communicating to people, getting the message out there, getting more people to get involved in this coding. What do you think, Andrei? You're a coder, right? You do a little bit of programming?
Yeah. I think, well, one of the good things about Git is that itself, it is distributed already. And hosting it on GitHub just means that, you know, if someone wanted to come fork it, they could do that from the central repository. But these developers have their own local branches, and I don't know. I feel like it is true that there's a lower barrier to submitting pull requests on the project when it's on GitHub. So I think that's probably a better way to go. I don't know, because GitHub has become the central, source of free open source software nowadays, and I feel like transparency is pretty important at this stage.
Yeah, and this is really where the regulators need to be going. They need to be going to the BIPs, the Bitcoin Improvement Proposal. This is just basically text documents. These are Wikimedia files that anyone can upload and suggest. Let's pick a good one like BIP32. And someone can just come in here with an idea like hierarchical deterministic wallets, which are now gaining more traction. We're getting more wallet makers integrating this into their software, which basically means you only need to produce one seed for your Bitcoin wallet, and you can produce a functionally infinite number of Bitcoin addresses, which means that when you're backing up your Bitcoin wallet, you only need to back it up once at the very, very beginning. Because at the moment, every time you send your Bitcoins, what happens is that it sends the change back to a new address, which means that if you don't back up your wallet after each transaction, you run the risk of losing coins. And so the hierarchical deterministic wallets was a BIP32 proposal, and you put it up, you put the idea, you say why it's needed, you give your solution, and then anyone can come in and say, well, actually, I've got a better idea, or I think I like the way you're going to do it. And it also means that these ideas can outlive their founders. And that's another important thing. Sometimes people drop away from these projects, they lose energy, something comes up in life. But if you put the idea out there, anyone can kind of pick it up and become a new champion for it.
And I think ultimately that's one of the most important things that GitHub offers, is that it's just the user interface alone is attractive to a wider audience. So if you had something like, I don't know, like the Apache project, where all of their, they have their own, repositories on their own sites. They might have mirrors on GitHub, but the central thing is on their own servers. It might be fine and it works and it might be great, but I feel like GitHub is more immediately inclusive just by its nature.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. And also you get some things with that, you get the developments that go on in the GitHub, meta development that happens that you don't have to do additionally. So all the stuff where signing code, where you put in a new pull request, you post some new code, you sign it with your key. All that sort of architecture is already there, and it sure would be nice to do things like posting keys into the blockchain and getting that sort of time-stamped data repository history. If it ever turns out that we want to go back and look at what happened historically in a forensic, backward-looking type view, then we could do that. The risk with GitHub is that there could be some forging going on. If someone's private keys were compromised and their code were changed and something malicious was stuck in there, that could be backdated history and planted in a central repository more easily than in a distributed one. But GitHub is already distributed, like Andrei said, it's already distributed enough where you have all the different branches that are out there in the world. That sort of thing is going to be spotted. There's already over 4,000 of them. So not too worried about it, but it's worthy of discussion.
Yeah, I think what you need are better project managers on these crypto projects, because we have such a small number of people that even know how to set up a coin. They don't know what work is involved, and as a result, these coins are only as secure as the most trustworthy auditor of that code. And how many people really go through the code to check, right? Look at Namecoin. When we found that massive bug, there was a huge bug in Namecoin, and somebody outed them on Reddit because they didn't get any feedback from the developers. And it's like, how on earth did that get overlooked for so long? Just because people are intelligent doesn't mean they don't make mistakes. History is not on your side if you're smart, right? You're nearly always proved wrong in time. And so it needs many eyes. We need many, many people looking at this, and they need to preferably not have an agenda.
I posted a link to a video yesterday, too. There was like a 20-minute video about coding for Bitcoin software. And it was a really good video, and I'm not a coder, but it explained how somebody could put bad code in there, and even if you are a coder, you wouldn't notice it because it could call another compiler to compile bad language that would be it would be camouflaged within the other code, and it's just so even if you're a good coder, you might not see what's in the code, basically.
It was just recently that I think some troll was pushing commits into the Linux repository, and I think one of them even got through, and there was like this PR frenzy. How could this happen? Why? What's going on?
Well, often developers don't know how to handle circumstances like that, and that's where somebody with good PR experience can come in handy, because the thing about PR is it's really about reputation management. That's not what it's become. It's become a lot more about distorting the truth. And actually, I want to wrap the show up on something about that in just a moment. But this is what I wanted people to take away from the show, and I wanted us to think more about it, is the way that groups of people get together, like some of these, centralized member-driven organizations we've been talking about do, and the strategy is to manipulate another group of people into performing a particular action that you want them to take. It's about one group of people coming together, agreeing on a sequence of activities that tells another group of people what to do. And a lot of these companies wouldn't even exist if they couldn't sell something to the outside, something they bought for cheaper on the inside. The only reason these companies exist in the first place is because they can extract rent from the outside world. Anyone? Someone's on the phone. Let me see if I can pull this up.
Are you talking about Ethereum and BitShares and all
Yeah,
this
yeah,
discussion
yeah,
that's
yeah.
going on?
You got
Right.
it.
Yeah.
So
So
here it is. Here it is. Here it is. We had a PR gaff the other day, much in the same vein that Andrei is talking about. It says, BitShares guy here. Sorry we caused such a stir. We are not evil greedy. Dan just sucks at PR. Ha ha ha. So this was something that was written on, I can't remember that. This is a good article, but I think I'll need to search around for the one that I mean. But yeah, essentially, somebody at BitShares did a post, I think it was Dan, saying that we are going to join forces with Ethereum because clearly Ethereum, having raised all this money now, have got the PR advantage. They have told a story to the wider world that they are the next big thing. They are Bitcoin 2.0. Remember that everyone is looking for the new pyramid. Everyone's looking for the new hype, the new buzz. And so Ethereum looks like they've stolen that narrative, right? Bitcoin is straggling around. It's trying to tell a story about VC funding. It's trying to tell us that we're going to get the mainstream, but no one's buying it. No one's buying because everyone that was going to buy bought already. And so there's no support in there. No one goes around saying, dollar's going to go up in value, let's all buy dollars, because what keeps the dollar propped up is the fact that there's resistance to going down because the whole world uses it as a reserve currency. Why? Because you have to buy oil with it, right? So nobody ditches their dollars, or at least not most of us do, because we're probably going to need it for the things we buy, but we don't buy it as a speculative asset. Bitcoin doesn't have that going for it. People bought Bitcoin originally because they expected something like a 5x return. That was the story they were telling themselves. Ethereum now come along. They tell a new story. Remember, it's a group of people getting together saying, right, how can we get a bunch of other people to buy into this? And they came up with some great legalese, some really good small print that I thought was just brilliant. I mean, it was worth $1 million, whatever they spent on the lawyers, because it was so good. It basically said, when you buy this shit, we're not guaranteeing anything. We can just fuck off and do nothing for the next year, and you are going to be left with just a private key. You're not even going to be left with any coins because no mining has taken place yet. So there's not even any hash rate. So BitShares got scared because even though BitShares predates Ethereum as being like a Bitcoin 2.0, it's got smart contracts, it's got all these lovely SEO'd buzzwords that are ranking very high at the moment, they now look like they're not cool anymore. And so they've then, spoken to Vitalik, who's the founder of Ethereum, and they've pictures of them, walking and talking together, playing crazy golf, I saw at one point. And now, of course, BitShares wants to rise on some of that pump. And so, in comes this sort of apologetic post saying, look, I'm sorry, we didn't mean to devalue your stock, guys. Sorry, we didn't mean to kind of dilute your message, saying that we were going to come and join the party. And of course, in comes the PR machine, Vitalik. He's very, very good at this, by the way, coming in quite reasoned with his response. And he's like, look, this is all about the technology, okay? It's not about tribes. Yeah, isn't it? Fuck. Of course it's about tribes. So it's not really, there shouldn't be a barrier to entry. It's just about the code. If you want to submit some code to Ethereum, that's absolutely cool. But to me, a lot of what underlies a lot of this goodwill, I mean, even the fact that in the title he has to mention that we're not evil and greedy, for me, just kind of spells it out.
Yeah, if somebody has to say that, it's usually pretty bad. I hate it when people say, let me be honest with you, or I'll be honest.
Yes.
Yeah.
But
That
yeah,
right
well, you weren't
there,
being honest before?
yeah, are you usually dishonest when you talk to me? Or, that's one, I used to say that every once in a while because it's part of a lot of people's normal speech and they don't think about it. But when I talk to people, I say, oh, aren't you usually honest? And I try to get people that don't mean to say it to quit saying that because it is a red flag. And this software license or this licensing that Ethereum did, that's really nothing new in the software industry. That's been going on in user license agreements for years, that by using our software or by opening this package, we make no claims that this shit is going to work.
But it's even worse in this case because now you're actually buying a financial security. Remember that what Bitcoin represents is the introduction of digital scarcity, right? We didn't have this before. In the old days of the internet, if I sent you an MP3, it didn't deprive me of the source. I still kept a copy my end. What Satoshi's mission was is, how do you digitize cache? How do you make it so that I can send you a piece of information such that it deprives me of the ownership of the original? And the answer was infinite traceability. You needed a ledger that everyone had the ability to control, where the rules were laid down up front. And where you left the question at the end of the abstract was, how do you get a bunch of actors to participate in the network where they can leave and join at will, and they can still trust that it will operate whilst they look the other way? That was the question. And partly it was down to the single history principle, honesty must pay. The way you get everyone to spend their money faithfully is by getting them to agree on a single history. And the way you enforce that is by getting them to compete, because people will always chase profit. That's one of the things that we've noticed. So if you make it more profitable to be honest than to be dishonest, then you can create that dynamic. What's slightly disturbing and what's revealing to us as people is that Bitcoin is really exposing our own motivations. Right? It's really showing up for us how we behave, not how we'd like to think of ourselves as a species, but how we actually are under these conditions of scarcity.
Well, you say we. Derek J always gets on everybody for that. Don't that?
Yeah, sure.
But,
no, it is a little bit collectivist.
Well, it takes advantage of the enlightened collective and self-interest, right? So everyone has their own self-interest, and what we do, we earn the Bitcoins. You have to do something, you have to contribute something, you have to make something in order to get them, or you have to mine them. That's really the only way, two ways to do it. You either do something to get them from someone who mined them, or you mine them yourself. And the mining is the proof of work, which creates the ledger, so it all feeds back into, the source of that, the solution to the Byzantine general problem, right? So,
and in order to get something, you either have to work for it, so you're trading your time and energy to get something of value, and then, or you're gambling to get it,
or you're bamboozling,
or you're trying to manipulate other people and trick them into selling you something at a lower cost, or giving you something at a lower value than what it's worth. And
I think of it as a gift economy. I mean, if you're sending someone Bitcoin, you're not going to get it back. It's a gift. It's gone, right? So there's no consumer protection. There's no way to reel it back in. And if you're sending somebody something, over the mail, they're going to send you Bitcoin. Maybe you haven't received the Bitcoin. You're going to send first. Someone sends first. Someone sends second. That always happens. You can always do it with an escrow, but then you're trusting a third party, right?
Well,
so,
multi-signature wallets are great for that, though. It's kind of like a escrow, but it's really not, because the third party just holds the third key, but doesn't actually hold
the third party too. Right, that's absolutely true. You could use and you could send it so that you need two keys to get it out, and no one has the two keys until the transactions have been approved, and that's a great way to do it. Or you could, I'm going to be a bastard and never give up the keys, even though I got it and the Bitcoins are gone and unspendable. I mean, there's bad things that you can do with it anyway. You still have to deal with the trust issue. So it is kind of this gifting community, this gifting economy that brings out both the best and the worst in people, right? Because there's the people that want to take advantage of that, and there's the people that begin with the idea of generosity of spirit, and okay, I'm going to go first and trust you, and then establish that trust. You're basically doing two things. You're not only sending first, but you're also giving the other person the ability to be more trustworthy.
And what I would like to see from people, if you feel you've been defrauded or slighted or whatever, write an article or something about it and put it on your website or on Reddit, and state your case, show the evidence, let the court of public opinion decide.
Mm-hmm. And the evidence is there. Yeah.
Right. If you like a product or something, I do this all the time. If I get a good product that I like, I'm excited about it, and I'll say, hey, this is a good product, and I'll write a review about it and post it on my website or on some place, and say, and then all the other people that are in kind of that circle will be like, oh, that was a great review, you know,
I
and they'll
think
point to,
I
go
think
ahead.
that's great. I think that, and I know you do that too, and I think that's great. The question is, I think with some of this Ethereum BitShare stuff, is it are they really finding each other good, or are they just joining PR forces? Because BitShares is kind of like live, and Ethereum isn't, and they're doing similar stuff, and they kind of and I mean supposedly it's about this thing DPoS, distributed proof of stake. And Ethereum is like, oh shit, we haven't really solved the mining problem per se because we want to be ASIC resistant, blah, blah, blah. We don't know how to do it, and BitShares has this thing, distributed proof of stake. I think that we want to integrate that. Supposedly that's what the collaboration is about. But I mean, I guess that is authentic. I mean, they're fascinated with each other's technology. On the other hand, you have this merging of their PR campaigns, which when one dilutes the other, then we see the apology on Reddit right now. And to be honest, I've gone into the BitShares thing a little bit to try to understand what it's about, but I mean, it kind of troubles me. What is live right now, which is being traded, is something called BitUSD. So basically, they have invented a crypto token, I guess you would call it, that's pegged to the US dollar. And this is supposed to be like a killer, thing that's going to be so stable and whatever. But I mean, you ask basic questions. So can I cash this out for US dollar? No, you can't. Do they have US dollars that are in a safe somewhere backing it up? No, it doesn't exist. So what's going on? Well, what's going on is you have to now keep in mind, I'm not saying I'm a BitShares expert, so if someone knows better, you feel free to correct me in the comments. But from what I understand, it's like this. I buy BitShares equal amount to what I want to, so I have to provide the collateral in BitShares X, which is this currency, in order to, that's what's backing this kind of BitUSD and other so-called assets. So they're named BitUSD, but there's no USD about it. So supposedly there's supposed to be like a bit gold in that BitShare system that should reflect the price of gold, but there's no physical gold backing it. Nobody paid any gold for it. Instead, what they did is just took that price, bought BitShares of it, and that's held somewhere in an escrow, I guess, as a collateral. I mean, it is kind of like a decentral escrow, and it's all fancy and high tech and cool, and that is kind of interesting. But I mean, it's kind of troublesome because basically you're going to pump that currency in order to do anything in that currency, and that's kind of like a house of cards, that's going to fall upon itself. So, that would be okay if people were presenting it in a way that is like, hey, this is a technology, we don't know exactly what's going to happen, it could be risky. Instead, I'm getting the message, hey, this is more stable than any altcoin. This is going to be less risk than anything ever. This is going to be
that's the new SEO keyword term. It's stability, right? That was what everyone was searching for, and so that's what they got to answer. But basically, this is reserving the right to loot, isn't it? These are the loot. This is suspected looting. It's a really good hashtag on Twitter. I encourage you to take part. And it was in response to the Ferguson protests. And it's like, hang on, what about these looters over here? Bitcoin gives you the opportunity to say, I give up control. Not only is it infinitely traceable, it's also open source. And when you open source something, you're basically saying, I give up the need for control. Jamie, go.
It just seems like the old baffle them with bullshit, too. They make it this really complicated thing that's financial, and people are like, oh, those people are really smart. I'm going to trust them with investing my money, and then they fleece them. I mean, we see that in the regular banking industry where they come up with all this wild shit like derivatives and stuff that you gotta be a banker pretty much to understand how it works.
Yeah, they're obscurists. They use deliberately obscuring.
The whole thing is derivative. That's what the whole thing is. The whole it's not hidden either. It's open. That it is basically 100% derivatives because there's no physical asset backing anything. I mean, it is all decentral and blah blah and all that and highly technical, etc. That part's interesting. I think that is interesting, but I get worried when people say, yeah, this is pegged to the dollar and this is like going to be bit gold, but there is no gold. There's not even any dollar. It's like fiat based on fiat that doesn't exist. I mean, this is really weird shit, you know.
Yeah, anything like that. I mean, a lot of people have a hard time understanding. I mean, the concept of the dollar evades most people, and then you get into cryptocurrencies, and Bitcoin is still priced on the dollar, and people automatically try to figure out how much it's worth in dollars. So then they start trading altcoins and this other stuff, so they're converting it from so many Satoshis to Bitcoins and then converting it back to dollars to see how much they got worth, and then you got the price of Bitcoin going up and down, and you got the price of your altcoin going up and down. Right there is enough to confuse the fuck out of most people. And then you start doing derivatives of the altcoins and that stuff. I mean,
well, I like
it's hard.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, basically it comes down to base risk. The base risk of the whole BitShares currency isn't. No one is talking about that. They're talking about the other stuff that's cool, that how it all interlinks, and you can make these cool assets and all this stuff, and we've got data streams, and that's all technically nice, and it seems to work. I mean, they're live or whatever, so that's good. I give them credit for being live and not just some thing that people are talking about. However, it's just no one's talking about that base risk. So when the price of BitShares crashes, then it's going to cost more to exit, and so you're going to have a really big problem, to say the least. But right now, most people participating have bought in and have a vested interest in the whole thing being a success. So we'll see. I mean, the cool thing is it's live, so we get to watch and see what is going to happen to this thing. Show us this picture of Africa that you had.
Oh, so yeah, this is the suspected looting that I was going to hashtag. It's a wonderful hashtag. I don't know who started it, but they deserve some real kudos here. And it just goes through history. I don't know where the one of Africa was, but we got this one like at the Boston Tea Party, but with Native Americans doing it. No one's seriously suggesting that we give the land back to the natives, right? But it's perfectly okay for this kind of I was here first discussion coming up in regards to the Ukraine and Palestine. Yeah, oh yeah, we're happy to go through the lineage then, but don't you dare suggest the same thing about us. And yeah, I think you bring up a great point, Theo, about base risk. They want to be able to control the hologram that you're in. Right? They want control over the ledger, and they want to be able to pull the rug from underneath you at a moment's notice and say all those decisions you thought you were making to give yourself more freedom and opportunity in the future, yeah, forget it. You should have been there when we started this damn thing. We had the kill switch. We had the kill switch at day 0, which meant that when you walked into our theater, that's exactly what you did. You were looking at a production. You were watching two-dimensional shadows on the wall, but we were the ones outside doing all the puppeteering with the shadows on the wall in the first place.
Yep, we pulled the plug on the projector.
Also, another thing is that if I understand how it works, I mean, they're talking about all these decentralized companies and all that, and that's a really cool thing. But I mean, there is a barrier to entry. It's not like anyone can go to BitShares or whatever and just create their own thing. You got to like pay a lot of money, cash, to get even in that system, and some kind of central authority. I think they're calling them delegates, which might be a good system. Has to kind of approve you. I think that's how it works. Again, I got to go more into it. but it's not like Counterparty or something where you can just make your own token and then the people have to trust you. It's different. It's the other way. They don't want everyone going nuts. So that's why I wanted to bring up. I don't know. I want to bring up something that I really enjoy that I think is funny that came out is Doge Party. So everyone, I've released some coins, some tokens. So if you want some, just give me your Dogecoin address because I've got some really cool ones coming. I got a BitLobby, and there's 999 million of those. If you want some, just tell me. I'll give you some. I got BitScares instead of BitShares, and I also got because you got to have an X on the end of everything. That's really important.
Oh,
so
yeah, that's trendy.
Yeah, that's cool. I got BotShares X, so that's going to be the next thing.
So it's like an art market. You set up an art market for words.
I've also got a Noise, which I'm going to use that somehow with some art thing and maybe the sound wallet, I don't know. And I also have Theo. So whatever one you prefer, I'm willing to airdrop some to you. Maybe you're into lobbying.
The irony, Theo, is that these probably actually have more value than a lot of these crypto projects.
Exactly. So I'm showing you publicly my Doge Party wallet right here where I've issued these assets. These are really the real deal assets. This is not backed by US dollar or anything. It's backed by me. That's why it's Theo coin here, Theo token, whatever. And I've also released BotShares X. That's going to be the real deal infrastructure coming in the future. And I also got BitScares, and I also had to do it that there's 123,456,789 total issued. And I might just arbitrarily, randomly decide to give dividends to people because I can do that since I'm the central authority of these tokens. So just post your Doge Party address. Go to DogeParty.io and tell me if you're more interested in lobbying, then we'll support that, or you're more interested in the next level Crypto 4.5 BotShares X.
Who can we bribe with the lobby?
BitShare lobby. Well, then we'll airdrop. I'll airdrop those to whoever wants them, and then I'll go to politicians and explain to them how they need to accept BitLobby coins, and then they can get some, and maybe they can buy stuff with them, and then we'll have our own economy based on BitLobby, basically.
I've been wanting to start up a tank company and weapons.
I just wanted to show anyone can do this. It's just a matter of doing it, and if people trust it or want it, then it has value. And like you said, maybe Theo token on Doge Party has more value than some other coin. Who knows? We never know, So pump Theo token.
No, I like it.
Hey, you show your face. That's more than a lot of people.
Yeah, exactly. Although someone did point out the other day that most of the successful coins have been ones that had anonymous founders, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting that people have more trust in an anonymous backer than somebody that comes out and shows their face, which seems counterintuitive to me, but it does make for something that would be more decentralized, where if I was going to invest in something that was truly decentralized, I think it would be more like a autonomous distributed network of people backing it, or like cells, I guess is what you would call it.
Well, let's finish up with this thought then, because it's been 2 hours. It's a good stint. Tomorrow I'm going to meet Mitch. Mitch is from Ghana. He's an expat, and I'm going to give him this. It's a memory stick that has the latest copy of the Bitcoin blockchain, plus a whole bunch of other goodies that he can then take back to Ghana. It means that he doesn't have to download 24 gigabytes of 5 years of transactions on the Bitcoin network. I can bootstrap, because often the internet connections in these regions of the world are fairly limited, but it means that his client will now be able to download each day's block in a matter of hours rather than days. Like at the moment, I think it takes 3 days to set up Bitcoin QT from a cold start, and the more distributed these nodes are, the more secure that the network is. You need more stakeholders from more cultures with more diversity, and that's where I think our strength comes from.
I agree.
Final thoughts. Joseph, Andrei, you haven't said anything in a while.
I thought, going back to the points earlier, that it's interesting what gets people interested in Bitcoin in the first place. Is it because you see it as magic internet money that a few people have become astronomically wealthy or overnight, basically, or is it the blockchain? Is it the technology behind it? And I feel like things like BitShare are maybe a symptom of this obsession with money and the idea that Bitcoin is essentially just a currency, which I think it's appropriate that Gavin Andresen refers to it as an experiment rather than something that we should call a currency, because that's what it is. It's a technology, and it's engineering, and it's something that's much deeper than whatever money is.
Yeah, Blake, Bitcoin Blake wrote a great article in one of the cybersecurity magazines that came out yesterday or the day before, that was talked about beyond money, what Bitcoin is, that I highly recommend.
Yeah, post the link and then I'll put it up. Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
Just add on to what Andrei just said, the experiment. It's still in beta, right? Bitcoin Core, Bitcoin QT, still 0.9.
Mm-hmm.
So, early days. They say early adopters are the first 2.5% that get into a technology. We're at probably less than 0.2%. So when there's 10 times as many people in Bitcoin as there are today, they will still be early adopters.
Yeah, I think a lot of these tyrants, they get their energy from your time. If you're not very good at knowing what to do with your time, they will tell you what is urgent. They will tell you what is next. So I want to see more stuff like this, where if you come across a psychopath in your workday environment, I want to see the emails. I want to see the audio, hear the audio files, the videos, any undercover stuff you get. I'll leave some links below to some undercover stuff you can get off of Amazon. It's been great to see you all again. I look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks very much to my guests and everyone at home. Goodbye.